February 1945. The wind was so cold it seemed to cut through their bones. Snow crunched under the women's feet as they walked along the broken road to the prisoner-of-war camp. Their faces were pale, eyes dull and weary, hair tangled from wind and dirt. Many had been just teenagers when the war started, and now, after years of fear and deprivation, they felt decades older than their age. The journey to the camp was long and grueling. Every step was a struggle, their breaths ragged, hands shaking from the cold. The women whispered to each other, wondering what awaited them. "They say their soldiers are cruel. We knew nothing, we're just ordinary people." Yet deep down, each expected the worst: shouting, violence, humiliation. They had lived too long in a world where humanity seemed a forgotten word. When the camp gates opened, what they saw was beyond imagination. Young American soldiers, barely older than themselves, stood there not with weapons ready, but with soft, cautious smiles. One offered a blanket, another a bowl of hot porridge, and a third greeted them in their own language. "Willkommen." Welcome. The women froze. It was as if the world had turned upside down. No one pushed, shouted, or threatened. Only care and warmth were offered. Inside, a storm of emotions raged. Disbelief, astonishment, confusion, fear. They exchanged glances, unable to believe it could be real. "Why are they so kind?" one whispered, while another clenched her fists, trying to hold back tears that fell anyway. They remembered newspapers, propaganda, stories of cruelty, and now reality hit them head-on. These soldiers were not the enemies they had been warned about. Every act of the Americans seemed incredible. The hot porridge was not just food, but a sign of attention. The blankets were more than warmth. They were proof that someone cared, even if just for a few hours. One woman noticed a soldier quietly adjusting the frayed edge of her coat, as if afraid it would not keep her warm. She looked into his eyes, and for the first time in years of war she saw something alive, human. A small spark of hope ignited within each woman. They understood that this camp was not a haven, not a place of rest, but a temporary station in a long journey of war. Yet even this tiny flicker of humanity made their hearts beat faster. Maybe the war was cruel, but here, in these quiet gestures and smiles, they saw that the world could still be kind. Inside the camp, life was harsh, even amid the unexpected kindness. The women were only beginning to adjust, and every day brought new challenges. Despite the soldiers' gentleness, the routine was strict. Inspections, basic lessons on hygiene, rules to prevent chaos. For many, it felt almost impossible. After months of war, fleeing, losing family, and seeing homes destroyed, discipline was a foreign concept. Yet in that strict order they found something they had not felt in years: stability. Soldiers patiently showed them how to use simple things: how to eat properly, care for their health, keep warm in the cold barracks. No shouting, no mockery, only calm explanations, demonstrations, and help. Each action was a small lesson in humanity, something they had been starved of for so long. Slowly the women began to share their stories, quietly, almost in whispers. Lost families, abandoned homes, friends they would never see again. Each time someone cried, the soldiers did not turn away. They reached out, tried to comfort, sometimes joking softly to coax a smile. One woman, Lisa, was especially withdrawn. Her eyes seemed cold, her face closed off to the world. But one day, a soldier noticed her sadness, brought a small piece of chocolate, and softly said, "For you." For the first time in months, Lisa felt warmth not just in her hands but in her heart. She didn't know how to respond and quickly turned away, yet a small smile appeared nonetheless. Distrust among the women grew, but so did curiosity and cautious interest in those showing care. Many began to understand that people could be different, some cruel, some kind. And these small gestures, a smile, a kind word, a helping hand, became tiny islands of hope in an ocean of chaos. Quiet connections began to form within the camp. The women started talking with the soldiers, learning to understand them, sometimes laughing together at simple jokes. It was unfamiliar, almost alien, but incredibly moving. For the first time they realized kindness could exist even amidst war. Weeks passed. The women slowly adjusted to camp life, but the habits of war and fear did not disappear quickly. Every sound, footsteps in the snow, the banging of doors, made them flinch. They still expected traps behind any act of kindness. Yet the soldiers continued to behave with honesty, calmness, and patience, as if proving that trust was possible even here. On a freezing day, Lisa noticed a young female soldier, Annie, smiling as she handed out hot tea to the group of women. A small gesture, but for the prisoners, it was almost miraculous. Lisa approached hesitantly, clutching her cup. Annie spoke to her in simple English, then, noticing her uncertainty, softly said, "Everything will be okay." A simple phrase, yet in it, Lisa heard a promise. Not propaganda, not an order, but from someone who saw her as a person. Other women began to voice their fears. What will tomorrow bring? How long will we be here? What about our families? The soldiers answered honestly, offering no impossible promises, but showing that they cared and listened. This honesty slowly began to break down the walls of distrust. However, not everything went smoothly. Some women, hardened by cruelty and deception, could not believe even these simple acts of kindness. They eyed the soldiers suspiciously, exchanging wary glances as if warning each other, "Don't be fooled." Tension arose among the prisoners as not everyone accepted the Americans' warmth. Small conflicts began, but alongside them emerged moments of real closeness. The women shared memories of home, children, tiny details now precious. The smell of bread, the warmth of a stove, soft laughter. The soldiers listened, sometimes commenting quietly, sometimes just sitting nearby, creating the feeling that their stories mattered and were remembered. During these weeks, Lisa experienced conflicting emotions. Fear and distrust were still there, but a new feeling began to grow, the sense that the world was not entirely lost. Kindness still existed even amidst war. Spring was approaching, but the cold clung tightly. The women gradually began to feel the rhythm of camp life. Morning roll calls, meals, quiet hours of rest. Some started helping each other, learning to share the little they had, laughing over minor mishaps. It felt strange, laughter during war, but it helped them endure. One day, Lisa saw another prisoner, Martha, fall on the snow-covered ground, slipping on the frozen path. Without hesitation, a soldier ran to help her up, brushed the snow off her clothing and softly said, "It's okay." For Martha, it was more than physical assistance. It was proof that someone cared without expecting anything in return. In the evenings, as the barracks grew warmer from the stoves, the women gathered in small groups, quietly discussing fears and memories. Sometimes soldiers sat nearby, listening, occasionally joking to ease the tension. These moments slowly chipped away at the walls of distrust. Some women began to open up. Lisa told, for the first time, about her younger brother left in Germany. She spoke quietly, words stuck in her throat, but Annie sat beside her, listening without interruption, without rushing. In that moment, Lisa realized that here she could be herself, without a mask, without fear. Yet trust remained fragile. Some prisoners could not forgive themselves for accepting warmth and safety offered by the Americans. "Why are they doing this?" they whispered. "We are enemies, we must be careful." But day by day the gestures of kindness became more obvious and routine. Soldiers brought tea, blankets, helped with cleaning, quietly tended to the women's health. These small, daily acts of humanity created a new rhythm of life. The camp gradually stopped being just a place of fear. It became a space where one could feel alive, where even amidst war kindness existed. Spring slowly asserted itself, yet the mornings remained foggy, nights dew-covered and cold. The women adapted to camp life, but the habits of war lingered. Fear, suspicion, constant vigilance. Every movement, every glance was checked, as if the past still tugged them back to destroyed homes, bombings, screams and loss. During this time, small human stories began to emerge, quiet, unnoticed but deeply significant. Lisa, who had struggled to trust anyone weeks earlier, began to talk with Annie, the young soldier. They shared childhood memories, favorite books, and simple joys absent in the world of war. Annie laughed at Lisa's awkward attempts at English, and for the first time in ages, Lisa allowed herself a light laugh without fear or tension. A small library appeared in the camp, a few old books brought by soldiers. The women read in turns, discussed stories, sometimes argued, but these were different arguments, not about survival or fear but about characters and events in the books. Soldiers listened, sometimes joining quietly, sharing their impressions. These moments created a sense of normal life, almost impossible in the midst of war. Yet trust was still delicate. Some women, especially those who had suffered the worst, suspected every gesture. "Why are they so kind? Is this a trick?" they whispered to each other. But when a soldier quietly brought an extra blanket to Lisa, telling her to keep warm, she felt for the first time that care could be genuine without hidden motives. Days lengthened, not just in sunlight but in the feeling of inner time. The women began to see in each other not just prisoners, but people with histories, dreams, pain, and hope. This created unusual bonds. Quiet conversations before sleep, preparing food together, discussing seemingly trivial things that had now become precious. One evening, Lisa sat by the barracks window watching the first drops of rain fall on the snow, a symbol of winter leaving. Annie came, sat beside her, and they silently watched the gray sky together, sharing the moment without words. In that silence, there was more trust than in all the words of war combined. Lisa realized she could be vulnerable here without fear of it being used against her. And it was a strange, almost impossible feeling. Trust. It grew slowly like a small sprout through cracks in concrete. The women began to understand that human kindness could exist even during war, that people could reach out without conditions, and that one could find support in another person, even when the world around them was falling apart. These weeks became a turning point. Lisa and many of the other women realized they could endure fear, pain, and loss, but they could also allow trust and care into their lives. Even though the war still raged outside the camp, among people who genuinely wanted to help, they for the first time felt that humanity had not died. The camp gradually became familiar, but the habit of order and care did not erase memories of war's cruelty. The women still carried fear and past traumas inside them, quiet but sharp as knives. At night, Lisa sometimes woke from nightmares, screams, explosions, dust, and smoke, and realized that the real war in her heart had not gone away. The soldiers noticed these moments, but they did not push or force the women to speak about the horrors. They simply remained present. Someone brought hot tea, someone gently touched a hand, someone sat silently nearby without asking unnecessary questions. These small acts of care became bridges, slowly moving the women from a world of fear to one where they could breathe even just a little. However, not everyone could accept this kindness. Some prisoners watched the soldiers with suspicion, seeing hidden traps in every gesture. They reminded each other, do not trust them completely. The war isn't over. This created tension inside the barracks, between those who wanted to trust and those clinging to the habit of distrust. One day an incident shook everyone. A young woman named Gretel slipped on ice near the supply warehouse and broke her leg. At first she tried to hide the pain, not wanting to trouble the soldiers, but it was too strong to conceal. The soldiers came, carefully laid her down, carried her to the barracks and tended to her, changing bandages and bringing food. Gretel was amazed. No one was angry, no one mocked, just quiet, constant presence full of attention and care. In that moment the women began to understand. Kindness requires nothing in return. It exists for its own sake. And though their past was full of deception and cruelty, here they saw the human side of war, rare but real. Lisa increasingly caught herself realizing that she was beginning to trust the soldiers, that she could allow herself to smile, joke, even relax a little. It was strange, almost impossible, but essential for the survival of the spirit. Small acts of care, attention, smiles. These gradually became an invisible shield against the fear that had gripped them for years. These weeks taught the women that trust is a process, slow and painful but possible. And while they were learning to open up, the soldiers continued to quietly stay near, supporting without demanding anything in return. Spring slowly but steadily pushed out the winter cold. The snow melted, leaving muddy puddles and cold winds sneaking under the barracks walls. The women began to adjust to the rhythm of camp life, but suspicion lingered in every glance. They still tested every act of the soldiers, every smile, every offer of help. Lisa, Martha, Gretel, and a few other prisoners gathered in the evenings by the barracks window, watching the rare sun breaking through gray clouds. These moments became almost sacred, the only joy in a gray, harsh reality. They shared memories of home, the smell of fresh bread, summer days by the river, evening talks with family. Soldiers sometimes sat quietly beside them, listening, not interrupting, giving space to speak without demanding answers. Small rituals began to form in the camp. Every morning, Lisa and Martha distributed bowls of porridge to those who would later rise for roll call. The soldiers observed, sometimes smiling, sometimes helping carry hot dishes to the farthest rows. These simple acts created a sense of community, small, temporary but real. Trust remained fragile. Some women still held back, watching kind gestures with suspicion. They whispered among themselves, "Don't trust them completely. They're Americans, the war isn't over." Internal barriers prevented full openness. But each day, every small gesture from the Americans chipped away at these walls. Someone brought warm clothing, quietly changed bandages for the sick, or simply sat nearby when a woman was struggling. One day, during another round of yard cleaning, Lisa noticed a small puppy sneaking through the camp fence. It was trembling, wet, and muddy. At first, the women were startled. An unknown animal could be dangerous, but one soldier quietly approached, picking up the puppy and saying, "He just wants warmth." The women could hardly believe it. Here, even amid war, simple joys were still possible. The puppy became their secret delight. They fed it, petted it, and laughed for the first time in months without pain. This little creature became a symbol that life went on, that kindness still existed. In the evenings, quiet conversations turned to the future. No one promised that the war would end tomorrow, but the women shared hope, that one day they could return home, meet their families, rebuild destroyed lives. Soldiers listened, sometimes smiling softly, sometimes joking to elicit genuine laughter. And that laughter was real, without pretense, without fear. Particularly touching was how the women began to help each other. Those who were once withdrawn now shared food, clothing, and stories. Each day brought small victories over fear. Someone allowed themselves to smile, another held a soldier's hand without fear, another simply sat silently, feeling heard and understood. Lisa increasingly realized that trust was not a weakness but a strength. She could allow herself to be vulnerable, and it did not destroy her, it made her stronger. The women gradually understood that in a world full of chaos, quiet islands of humanity could exist. And though the war raged outside the camp, here they first felt they could live, breathe, laugh, and hope. At this time, the smallest joys and simple human connections felt almost miraculous. Every morning, every greeting, every smile became a brick in the new world they were building in their hearts, despite the destruction around them. And though the uncertainty of the future still hung over them, the women felt for the first time that trust, care, and friendship could be a real support. With the arrival of summer, the camp began to come alive. Snow was gone and the ground was soft and muddy, but sunny days added hope. The women had grown accustomed to the routine, though the war had left its marks: fear, anxiety, invisible scars. Even a simple step across the yard could trigger memories of explosions and flight. But it was during these days that the true power of trust became apparent. The soldiers continued caring for the prisoners, checking their health, bringing extra blankets, teaching simple skills to make everyday life easier. The women laughed more often, discussed books and stories with each other and the soldiers, and these conversations created a sense of a living world amid the war. With the growth of trust came the first trials. Some women, scarred by deep trauma, still could not open up. Martha one day broke down, accusing a soldier of possibly hiding motives. For a moment, silence and tension fell among the other prisoners. They doubted again whether trust could be real. It was in that moment that the true humanity of the Americans shone through. The soldier quietly said he understood her fears, that not all his actions were perfect, but he sincerely wanted to help. He did not justify himself, did not get offended, did not try to prove anything with words. He simply stayed close, allowing Martha to be angry and suspicious. And this became a lesson. Trust is not an instant act, but a process in which both sides learn to accept each other. Small joys began to occur in the camp that felt almost miraculous. The women cooked together, shared memories of home, sang quiet songs taught by their mothers or sisters. One evening, Lisa and Annie sat on the barracks roof watching the sunset. They were silent, but the silence was full of understanding, care, and quiet joy. It was a moment of real closeness when the past lost its hold, even if only for a few hours. Laughter became more frequent. The women laughed at each other's small mistakes, at soldiers' awkward attempts to explain their habits. The laughter was unexpected, almost foreign, but it helped relieve tension and gave them strength. Genuine friendships began to form, real, sincere, and strong despite differences in past experiences, nationality, and upbringing. Yet the shadow of war remained. Occasionally, news came from the front of new victims, reminding everyone that the world was not safe, that each day could be a trial. Still, the women began to understand. Life was possible in this world, trust was possible, relationships could be built even where chaos reigned. Small gestures of kindness, a smile, hot tea, assistance, became their weapon against fear. For the first time, Lisa felt that life could be real despite the war. She could laugh, cry, trust, receive care, and give it in return. And although hardships still lay ahead, there was a chance to preserve the humanity that had seemed almost lost. Summer was fully underway, yet heat and sunshine could not melt the inner cold the women carried. Each day brought new trials, memories of home, lost families, news from the front, all heavy burdens they could not leave outside the camp gates. But it was during these months that the true power of trust and humanity emerged. Lisa, Martha, Gretel, and other women began to sense that the camp was not merely a waiting place for the war's end, but a space where living and feeling was possible, even as the world crumbled around them. The soldiers continued their quiet yet meaningful acts of kindness. They brought fresh water, helped care for the sick, taught skills that could be useful after liberation. These gestures gradually became symbols of hope. One evening, an incident changed the atmosphere of the camp. A young woman, Elsa, slipped and fell, hurting herself badly. She could not get up, Her fear and pain were visible to all. Soldiers rushed to her side. One supported her, another brought water, a third spoke gently, calming her. The women watched and for the first time understood that care could be genuine, without conditions, without hidden motives. This moment broke the last barriers of distrust. After this incident, the women began opening up to each other more than ever. They shared stories and memories of children, homes, and friends they had lost. Lisa talked about her brother, Martha about her mother, Gretel about childhood games in the street. Soldiers listened without interrupting, sometimes quietly commenting, sometimes simply sitting nearby, creating the feeling that their stories mattered and were valued. Evenings became times of quiet joy. The women prepared meals together, discussed the books they read, laughed at awkward jokes, exchanged glances full of understanding. Lisa and Annie sat on the barracks roof one evening watching the sunset, and the silence between them was full of meaning, trust, care, friendship. In that moment, Lisa realized that vulnerability did not make her weak, it made her stronger. Trust became a force uniting people. Small joys, simple gestures, a cup of hot tea, a blanket on a cold night, the puppy that became a symbol of hope, created the sense that even in the midst of war humanity could be preserved. The women began to understand that friendship and care were weapons against fear and despair, that trust could be rebuilt step by step, and that it could heal the soul. And then, when Lisa allowed herself to fully open up, she felt her heart could feel again. She laughed with friends, helped those weaker than her, accepted help from the soldiers. She understood that even in a brutal war, there was space for kindness, mutual aid, and genuine humanity. This period became a turning point. The women no longer simply waited for the war to end. They lived, building their small islands of light within the camp. And though uncertainty about the future still hung over them, they felt for the first time that they could hold on to each other, trust, and believe in people. In these moments, laughter, tears, care, and friendship intertwined, creating a unique atmosphere, a place where, despite the cruelty of the world, humanity had not perished. In this, Lisa and her friends found something greater than mere survival. They found hope, strength, and faith in people. Summer was slowly drawing to a close, and the air in the camp grew warmer, yet the tension of war still hovered over them. The women were no longer the same who had arrived in February, they had changed. Fear and distrust had not completely vanished, but trust, friendship, and care had become their new source of strength. The day of liberation came quietly. News of the approaching end of the war spread through the camp, and for the first time in years, the hearts of the prisoners beat faster with hope rather than fear. The soldiers smiled, supported them, helped pack belongings, and calmly answered thousands of questions about the future. The women looked at these young men and, for the first time, understood that the war had not entirely destroyed humanity. Lisa hugged Annie. It was not just a farewell, it was a sign of gratitude for trust, care, and patience. Martha held the puppy, which had become a symbol of life and hope in their camp. Gretel laughed, remembering a joke from a soldier who had tried to explain the rules of a card game. In that moment, the world seemed not as frightening as it had before. The farewell was quiet. The women walked toward the camp gates, not with emptiness and fear, but with gratitude and respect. They knew the war had left scars, but within them remained humanity, preserved by the smiles, care, and sincerity of the American soldiers. As they exited, they looked back at the camp. It was no longer merely a place of confinement. It had become a space where they had learned to trust again, where they rediscovered joy, laughter, and hope. These moments would stay with them forever, as proof that even in the darkest times, light could be found. Lisa walked with a straight back, feeling the warmth and support of friends, new bonds, a new family. She understood, humanity was not lost. It lived in people ready to smile, to help, to show care. And this knowledge became their greatest inheritance of the war. Not fear, not pain, but faith in people and the ability to trust. The story ends, but its memory remains. A story of how small acts of kindness, smiles, hot tea, care, and attention can transform even the coldest and cruelest place into an island of hope and humanity amidst the chaos of war. The camp, once a place of fear and despair, had transformed into a space of fragile but real humanity. Every shared laugh, every helping hand, every small act of care built a new rhythm of life. The women learned to trust, to hope, and to recognize the goodness that still existed in people even amid war. Lisa felt a profound change within herself. She had survived the fear, the hunger, the endless uncertainty, but now she could feel joy, connection, and warmth. She laughed freely, shared stories, and allowed herself to be vulnerable without fear of judgment. The small gestures of the soldiers, the blanket, the warm tea, a quiet word of comfort, had become symbols of resilience and humanity, teaching her and the others that even the darkest times could hold light. As the women prepared to leave the camp, they carried more than their belongings. They carried memories of trust, friendship, and care. Each face they had encountered, each hand that had reached out to help, became a reminder that kindness was not lost to the world. The bonds they formed in those months, among themselves and with the soldiers, were unspoken yet powerful, built on the quiet recognition of shared suffering and mutual support. The war outside continued, but inside the hearts of these women, something enduring had grown. They knew that the cruelty they had endured would never fully disappear from memory, yet they also knew that they had glimpsed the strength of humanity. The acts of compassion, however small, had transformed fear into hope, helplessness into empowerment, and isolation into connection. As Lisa and the others walked away from the camp, the sunlight falling on the muddy ground, they understood that life could still be full of meaning. They had witnessed that trust could be rebuilt, that friendship could bloom in unlikely places, and that the human spirit could endure, even in the harshest conditions. The story concludes, but the lesson endures. Small acts of kindness, care, and attention, whether a smile, a hot meal, or a moment of listening, have the power to restore humanity. Even in a world torn by war, hope can be nurtured, and the capacity for compassion can survive. And in that survival, Lisa and the women found not only their own strength but a blueprint for carrying the light of humanity forward into the uncertain future. One story has ended, but there are many more to come. Subscribe to stay up to date with the next story.